But alright, I think it is time we switch the music to the theme song.
Climb aboard, cause you don't know exactly where or when we'll go. Chicago 1893, or the Gilded Age in NYC. Blast off into outer space, drink till you're flat on your face. From the comfort of your home, so if you puke alone, one day we'll even find that place in France. And don't come crying to us if you pee your pants. Time travel pub crawl, time travel pub crawl, time travel pub crawl, yeah!
Alright, welcome once again everybody to Virtual Time Travel Pub Crawls. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours, a tour guide both here in Chicago and in New York most years. This year, of course, today in fact I was supposed to be there with a school choir from Michigan, probably going to the Statue of Liberty, all the usual haunts. I went to the Statue of Liberty like a dozen times last year. But anyway, for some other relevant stuff, I'm also the author of the Mysterious Chicago book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, the cult classic, I Kissed a Zombie and I Liked It. I wanted to call it Dead Guys Have No Reason to Live, but they didn't think it was as funny as I did. And the Smart Alec's Guide to American History. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do here, I started doing virtual tours a few months ago because in-person tours are off the table right now. But I quickly realized, it would be fun to do a virtual pub crawl. And then figured, hey, virtual pub crawls are not bound by the usual rules of time or space. We could go anywhere. We could go to bars that haven't existed in decades. We don't have to stick just around Chicago. Well, it's Mysterious Chicago Tour, so we have been sticking around Chicago for the most part. But we can just kind of do whatever we feel like. It's like boozy Muppet babies around here. So, in 1915, a diver named Frenchy Deneau found the wreck of a homemade submarine buried in the muck under the Chicago River. They named the thing the Fool Killer and put it on display on South State Street. For years, it's been one of the great Chicago mysteries. Where did the thing come from? We don't know. Whatever happened to it? We don't know. Except that we're using our imagination here, so I'm going to say that we went inside the tomb of Ira Couch, and there it was, the Fool Killer. Turns out it's not just a submarine, it also goes through time, it goes through space, it goes down narrow alleys, can park anywhere, also makes julienne fries. Of course, the one problem with it is a little bit difficult mechanically. We have to employ a full-time mechanic to keep the thing working. In fact, hey, we're getting a message from our mechanic right now.
Hey, Adam?
Hey, everybody, look, it's Eli the Mechanic down below. What's up, man?
Oh, I just had a suggestion for tonight's pub crawl.
This is below your pay grade, but,
Well, you know how this thing can go through time and space, right?
quick dissolving, fast acting, too.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel like you haven't been taking full advantage of the and space part of that.
What do you mean? We went from Pullman to the Gold Coast in one tour.
Yeah. I know. But, what if we went to New York City?
New York City?
Out there, there's a world outside Chicago.
Don't say Schaumburg.
There's a life beyond the second city. There's an other city out there. They eat dirty water hot dogs.
I do like those.
Take a look beyond the windy city.
We're going to talk about that term.
To where the pizza's crispy.
Hey, I'll put our thin crust against anybody else's thin crust any day.
Get out your cocktail glass, we're gonna take New York in one of those new flying submarines. We're gonna find adventure in the evening air. Cabarets from the olden days and hotels from 1915. Get out your cocktail glass, we're gonna sail through time. And in the cheesy jokes we'll surely drown. We'll take a drive to the beatnik dives and we'll close the town feeling wild. And we won't come home until we're fully Come on, Adam. The bright lights of Broadway. More elevated trains. The stuffed whale at Barnums Museum.
Well, you need a license to be a New York tour guide. Good thing I got one!
Hurrah! Hurrah!
All right, everybody. It sounds like we're going to New York City. Everybody buckle up. We're going to be going through some space travel here. All right, everybody, let's hear it for Eli. All right, and here we go. Now, we're going to talk just a second, as I said, about the term Second City and Windy City. It's common to hear on tours here in Chicago that Second City doesn't mean we're second to New York. It means that we rebuilt the city after the first one burned down. It's kind of a fantasy of ours. No, it always meant second in population to New York. Also, people love to say that Windy City has nothing to do with the weather. It's about people being full of hot air. Truth is, we really have no idea where that came from. People like to say it's from when they were building up to the World's Fair in 1893. It was about the politicians boosting us. But that term is way older than that. It started appearing in newspapers in the 1860s, and nobody's really sure what exactly they're on about in those. It could have been the weather. Earliest one I can find about it being bragging is when we said that our population was growing and growing and growing. In any case, looks like we are landing. Well, we're going to go back in time a little bit, too. And now that we're back in time, we're going to go down to Nolita. Neighborhood a little bit below Greenwich Village. Right on Houston and Crosby stood a place called Harry Hill's Variety Theatre. This was what we would now call perhaps a wretched hive of scum and villainy that also happens to be the place where they invented vaudeville, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Aiden, you'll find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our point of view. So, let's go ahead and step inside of Harry Hill's Variety Theatre. So, I'll make myself a little smaller here. Harry Hill's Variety Theatre was described in 1873 in a book called The Dark Side of New York Life. Harry Hill's saloon is the meeting place of the lowest class of pickpockets, gamblers, burglars, prize fighters, and rowdies, while the female portion of the visitors consist entirely of prostitutes. Here, youthful levity takes the first steps on the road to degradation. Here, the slippery road of sin, and first inhales the poisonous atmosphere. At first, it is amused for him to watch the ways of the male and female guests of the saloon. Then he talks with one of the sirens, and in the course of one of the regular visits, he tries a short dance. From dancing, he goes to drinking, and from drinking, back to dancing. That's the kind of place we're heading into tonight, everybody, just so you've been warned. Another drawing from it looks like this, makes it sound a little bit classier. But in 1868, 5 years before, it was said that this room is full of thieves, pickpockets, prize fighters, bullies, short boys, and denizens of the bloody sixth, females of all grades, shoplifters, counterfeiters, women just out of the state prison, panel thieves, and females whose trade it is to get employment in houses as domestics only to commit robbery. By the side of a police sergeant sits a panel thief. By the side of a Broadway jeweler sits a noted shoplifter. A lawyer of repute can be seen drinking with a prize fighter, and respectable businessmen mingle cozily with desperate New York males and females. Now, a lot of this was, for those asking for the quotes, the first was from The Dark Side of New York Life by Frederick Gerhard. The second was from Matthew Hale Smith's Sunshine and Shadow in New York. And a lot of this was just them being coy about the pairings of people that you see here. Really, in the 1860s and 1870s, this was about the one place you could go in New York and see interracial couples dancing. So, just for the first drink of the night, I notice I love this particular drawing of it. You can see multiple guys have snuck dogs in with them. And also you can see this guy here who is drinking through a straw. Now the straw gives away what's going on here. He is drinking a drink called a sherry cobbler. I'll put that down below. Sherry cobbler doesn't have a specific recipe, but basically it was dry sherry with grenadine, lots and lots of ice. I've here substituted frozen chopped fruit so it doesn't water your drink down, and whatever fruit juice you feel like putting inside of it. Charles Dickens said that this would make you in every respect worth mentioning a new man. It is also the drink that introduced the world to drinking through a straw. Dickens had a hard time describing this. You can imagine trying to describe drinking from a straw from somebody who has never seen a straw before. What he said in Martin Chuzzlewit, when Martin watches Mark Tapley drink one of these, he says, He plunged a reed into the mixture, which caused a pleasant commotion among the pieces of ice, and signifying by an expressive gesture that it was to be pumped up through that agency by the enraptured drinker. Okay, then. I'm going to move this to the side a little bit. I hate to cover up this guy's mustache, so I won't. But we'll put that down below. We'll talk a little bit about, I mentioned that they basically invented variety theater here, eventually invented vaudeville. So Mark Twain attended here one night. He said, after some musical numbers came a man who mimicked fighting cats and the buzzing of mosquitoes and the squealing of a pig. Then a homely young man in a Highland costume entered upon the stage and danced. And he ought to have danced moderately because he had nothing in the wild world on but a short coat and short stockings. This was apparent every time he whirled around. However, no one observed it but me. I knew that because several handsomely dressed young ladies from 13 to 16 and 17 years of age went and sat down under the footlights, and of course they would have moved away if they had noticed that he was only partly dressed. Among the other acts who would perform here regularly was a ventriloquist who had a doll named Mrs. Partington. Mrs. Partington was the subject of a lot of humor columns in those days. I've read some of them. It was mostly malapropisms, which I really find kind of charming. Is having read some of the comedy routines that took place at Harry Hill's, in between the wrestling and boxing matches, which were also irregular, they would have this ventriloquist doll telling these jokes that make me think that if you went up there and read Amelia Bedelia Saves the Day to these pickpockets and jewelers and police chiefs and politicians and sex workers and thieves, they would think you were the funniest person on the planet for reading Amelia Bedelia. So, I don't think the kind of music they played here would be that entertaining to us right now. So I found a couple of things that we can illustrate too. First, there was a guy named Joseph Pujol Le Peloton. This was a guy who entertained all over Europe doing fart tricks, is what it was. He would inhale air in to his butt, and then an exhale doing impressions, things like a thunderstorm, the sound of bowling, the sound of barnyard animals, celebrity impressions sometimes. No audio recording survives, but strangely there is video. Dude looks exactly like Frank Oz. And talk about your good stashes. So fortunately or unfortunately, there's no sound. We'll just have to imagine what that must have sounded like. But that might have been followed during a night at Harry Hill's by something like this. This is a film from the 1890s that was hand-colored, one of several different versions of what was called the Serpentine Dance. Oh, hey, PM. They always say he never actually passed gas. It was all just done with air. How he learned to do it, I don't want to know. Liz, exactly. I was actually going to bring that up later. It seems kind of like a precursor to Sally and also Faith Bacon's Feather and Fan dances later on. But they'll come up very shortly. So, if everybody's got their sherry cobblers ready to go, you never want to stick around Harry Hill's too long because you're surrounded by pickpockets here. And also, a fight will break out at any given time. So, from Harry Hill's 1860s through 1880s establishment, we are going to time travel up about 50, 60 years or so. Here's our time travel graphic. A reminder to stay home. So, we're going to go up to Midtown now. Up on 56th Street initially was a place called the El Fay Club, which was emceed by a young woman named Texas Guinan. I think it was pronounced Guinan, actually. Tex Guinan. Now, back in the 1890s in Montmartre, there was a guy named Aristide Bruant, most famous now just for being the subject of Toulouse-Lautrec paintings, but he would MC at cabarets. His big trade was insulting all the rich people who came in. Like, one particular thing I remember reading, a translation of one of his songs that he would sing to people went, "You look like rotting meat or a pile of aborted muck. Your mothers must not have had teats, for you don't even know how to suck." No, we should go to like the Moulin Rouge in Montmartre and the Merleton and the Chat Noir on one of these. The taste of French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. But there is a New York performer, Tex Guinan, was inspired by the stylings of Aristide Bruant. I don't know if it was directly or not, but she had very much the same clip. People would come into her place and she would shout, "Hello, suckers!" And then she would throw ping pong balls at everybody, as seen in this clip. In many ways, it reminds me a little too much of Dick's Last Resort. You would come up to people and say, "So your mother might have thought you were charming. To me, you're nothing but a cover charge." She would entertain the guests with comic poetry, probably mean, not quite as mean as Aristide Bruant's, but probably a lot naughtier. Also, this was all during the 1920s. Now, this footage is from a club of hers called the 300 Club, but she had a new club just about every month because she was pretty openly serving liquor during Prohibition and not making all of the necessary payoffs. So very regularly, she would come to her club and find that it had been padlocked, as was a common trick at the time. If they had a back door, they'd just start using the back door instead, but more often she would have to move around from place to place to place. But by all accounts, it was a great place to see a show. She would introduce every performer by saying, "Let's give the little girl a great big hand." Now that's actually thought to be a phrase that she coined, "Let's give them a great big hand." I'm always very hesitant to say anybody is the originator of any phrase like that. It's a common tour guide trick to be like, "That's where we get the phrase so-and-so." Honestly, it never really turns out to be true. But at the same time, in the 1920s, though liquor was officially illegal, a place did publish a book called Bottoms Up, a book of cocktail recipes. Among them was the Tex Guinan cocktail, which you can't really read here, so I'll put up a bigger version of it. The Tex Guinan Whiskey Cobbler. Sort of a variation on our original cobbler. For this one, you mix up 1.5 ounces of whiskey with 0.5 of simple syrup, a dash of Angostura bitters, dash of grenadine. I don't have the orange slice, but that's what I've been drinking tonight. It's very similar to a regular Manhattan. Oh, those asking about the swastika outside, this would have been before anybody really associated that with Nazi stuff. It's like there's a Jewish guy in The Great Gatsby who's a member of something called the Swastika Club. It wasn't really associated with stuff like that for another decade or so. So, as far as the entertainment here, there were a lot of different kinds of musical styles that were played. Sally Rand, the fan dancer, who we'll talk about more in a minute, performed here occasionally. But there is one band that I've worked with a lot over the years, especially on my podcast where I have musical guests sometimes. They're in the house tonight, in fact. So for our musical entertainment here at the 300 Club, here is Mayhayley's Grave, a Southern Gothic swing band out of Carrollton, Georgia. Give these guys a listen. This is great. Sound not coming off for anybody else?
Gingerlicious. Well, I don't think so. But I've been told a ginger woman ain't got no soul. I don't believe them. They're telling lies. 'Cause I got so close to heaven when I look into the eyes. Some like them tall and tan, some like them dusty. But you know me, I like my girls a little rusty. I women till you taste the ginger listen. They say blondes have more fun and brunettes are true, but you won't believe your luck when there's a redhead after you. You think that you know women, what you think you know's fictitious. Never learn a thing till you've been screwed by ginger listen. So you so red hot, let's do a few shots. Show me all your freckles while I play connect the dots. So we can be shady, lady, and have some fun. Stay in bed all day so you can keep out of the sun. Late at night, can't get right. I can't sleep, I got this crazy appetite. Chocolate and vanilla, very good to see. But I'm only craving cinnamon and cherries to believe. They say blondes have more fun and brunettes are true, but you won't believe your luck when there's a redhead after you. Oh, you better watch out when a redhead attacks, or you end up with a 500,000 scratch marks on your back. Say you're not afraid to play with fire. Talk about a dame of flame, you're preaching to the choir. Oh, one was my first time. Slender in the grass will probably be the death of me, so one will be my last. Some like 'em tall and tan, some like 'em busty, but you know me, I like my girls a little rusty. I dig 'em fiery, sexy and vicious. You got no taste of women till you taste the ginger listen. They say blondes have more fun and brunettes are true, but you won't believe your luck when there's a redhead after you. It's a wild kind of witchcraft, make you superstitious. She'll abracadabra, that's the stuff that ginger listen. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Give everybody a second to catch up here. All right, Mayhayley's grave, everybody. In the grand tradition of text, let's give them a great big hand. A couple of them are in the house tonight. James and Jamie. All right, a couple of questions going back in the comments. I have to restart my my feed over on the Time Travel Pub Crawls page to see them. This was in various locations because you kept getting padlocked and kicked into other ones, but they were mostly around Midtown. Harry Hills was around Houston and Crosby, just south of the village in Nolita. And everybody make sure to check out Mayhayley's grave on Instagram, Facebook, all of those. Recently seen at Dragon Con last year. And for those of you who asked about the song Your Neighborhood Gives Me the Creeps, Jamie, the trumpeter in that video, did play on Your Neighborhood Gives Me the Creeps. All right, so we're going to move up through time and space a little bit more. And for those of you who are new around here, every morning around 10 o'clock Central on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page, I do a thing called morning mini tours, where usually I'm around a cemetery or something. Sometimes we all put our heads together and try to find a grave. The last couple of days we've covered a few things that I'm just going to get to right here really quickly. We're going to zip, not even really that far across town. just over to 56th Street once again to talk a little bit about the Ziegfeld Theatre. We went to Mr. Ziegfeld's father's graves this morning. He was the founder of the Ziegfeld Follies. This was a musical comedy review that sort of it expanded on what you might have seen at Harry Hill's and made it a lot more of a spectacle, a lot more production budget. On the interior, it was also a much fancier place on the inside. But yesterday we sought out the grave of a woman by the name of Faith Bacon. Now, we talked a little bit during the Serpentine Dance. Somebody mentioned that it reminded them of Sally Rand, the fan dancer at the World's Fair here in Chicago. This was a woman who danced wearing nothing, but holding up a couple of strategically faced fans. And she actually appeared at Tex Whedon's Club as well. There's some footage of her. I couldn't find good footage without a giant watermark on it, but it's there. But Sally was later sued by a woman named Faith Bacon, who claimed that she had stolen her act. We found her grave here in Chicago yesterday on the morning mini tour. Here's a quick bit of footage of Faith Bacon, who was a Ziegfeld girl for a while. Put it right about where the stage would have been. Thanks especially to PM Paris and Susan who helped find that grave yesterday. Without help, I never would have found that thing. It's a little flush to the ground, kind of buried in the weeds these days. But we've been up at Ziegfeld for a while. We've been at a lot of places that were considered very risque at the time. I kind of feel like we ought to head downtown a little bit. We'll just kind of careen our way downtown. We've got a good parking space for the Fool Killer. You don't want to give up a parking space in New York if you got one. All right, we'll also just kind of hyperspace our way back down. We're going to go to a fancier place called Tony Pastor's. Before that, you couldn't even get to Tony Pastor's right away without first passing a place called McGurk's Suicide Hall on Bowery. Down on Bowery, this was a place where it was kind of known as a very similar to Harry Hill's, only a little bit rougher. Also developed a reputation for people going there to kill themselves, primarily by drinking carbolic acid. Mr. McGurk had enough class to start naming his establishment Suicide Hall, even though he looks exactly like the dad from Mary Poppins here. But eventually, in the grand New York tradition, it got gentrified and became a family place around 1903. But just down the block from that would have been Tony Pastor's. Now, Tony Pastor's is more properly credited with inventing vaudeville. He's the guy they usually credit for it, not Harry Hill. But what he did was very, very family-friendly stuff. So we could go here to get a nice, wholesome bit of entertainment after those last. But here's the problem. They won't let us have anything to drink. This was a family-friendly place. Children were welcome in this place. So, in any case, I don't think we can really drink here. What do you think, Eli?
We'll ditch from Pastors and hit the Astor and close the town like a trunk.
And we won't come home until we're stinking drunk. All right, I've heard enough. Let's go to the Astor. All right, so...
Hello, sport. Welcome to the Hotel Astor.
Up on 44th Street was the Hotel Astor, torn down in about 1960. Very fancy place. It was the kind of place that had a really fancy rooftop bar before such things were really fashionable. Really gorgeous ballroom as well. Now, there was a very fancy bar here. Babe Ruth used to have a payphone next to his locker in the Yankee Stadium locker room. Women would try to call it to try to make a date with him. He never answered it. Sometimes his teammates would and say, "Yeah, this is the babe," and make a date to meet them at the bar of the Astor Hotel. So any given night when the Yankees had a home game, there were probably several women hanging around the bar at the Astor, thinking that they had a date with Babe Ruth that night. It was regarded as both as a very, very classy place and also as a notorious pickup place. There's a particular song that was written about it that I always thought was amusing.
Oh, she had to go and lose it at the Astor. She didn't know exactly whom to blame, and she couldn't say just how or when she lost it. She only knew she had it when she came.
She had to go and lose it at the Astor. It turns out late in the song that she lost her cape. Though I wouldn't call it a double entendre, it was in fact a single entendre. That was banned by the BBC, that song. But, alright, we've gotten away from pastors, why don't we see if we can get a drink? Oh no.
Hello, sport. Welcome to the Hotel Astor.
Wait, aren't you that jerk we saw at the Stratosphere Club in Chicago?
Who's to say? I have worked the Stratosphere, but obviously I wouldn't remember the likes of you.
If I wanted to be insulted, I'd go back to Texas Place.
No need for an extra trip. I'm happy to insult you here.
Look, we were just at Tony Pastor's and they wouldn't let us drink.
Those barbarians.
Can't you make us something?
How about I make you a Park Avenue? It's as close to that high level of society as you're likely to ever get.
Look at me, I'm a big jerk. I'm probably named Reginald Oxford Smythe.
What's that? Speak up, you mumbling ragamuffin.
I just said, what's in a Park Avenue cocktail?
Gin, sweet vermouth, pineapple juice, and orange curacao.
Sounds tasty. We're going to take ours over to the Algonquin, where at least the insults are witty.
The Algonquin? Good luck. I don't go there anymore. They never laugh at my jokes. Here, take a napkin with you. You don't want to soil their seats.
We've run into this guy over and over again on these pub crawls. Reginald Oxford Smythe, our arch nemesis. But just a couple of doors down, and the next building we're going to is still here, just the place we're going inside of it is not. The Algonquin Hotel was only a couple of steps away from where the Astor was here on 44th Street. Well regarded as a place, let me move up the cocktails so everybody can see that a little bit longer. But this one is pretty tasty. Gin, sweet vermouth, pineapple juice, orange curacao. So, the Algonquin was the home of the Algonquin Round Table, where authors like Benchley and Dorothy Parker would sit around having lunch every day throughout the 1920s and try to outdo each other with witty comments. Dorothy Parker, probably the greatest wit of the bunch, later said, "It was the 20s, damn it. We had to be snarky." She is the origin of many, many witty phrases. It's hard to find a good one because people tend to attribute every old-timey witty phrase to her. But since I'm drinking a martini, basically a martini right now, there's one: I like to have a martini. 2 at the, or maybe 2 at the most. 3 and I'm under the table. 4 and I'm under the host. Also, if you can seek out her theater reviews. In particular, she wrote a couple of reviews of plays by A.A. Milne, who also wrote Winnie the Pooh. Absolutely hated them. Which is not exactly surprising. She's not exactly his target audience. It's not really fair to read these reviews, but they're absolutely hysterical. But the Algonquin Round Table group, they've got a kind of commemoration to them inside. That's not really the actual table. But before they got started in the sitting at the round table, they actually met in a place called the Oak Room, where instead of a round table, they were pushing 2 square tables together. The Algonquin Oak Room was New York's finest cabaret venue up until about 2012 when they closed it. So there is actually an Algonquin cocktail as well. It's fairly similar. The Algonquin cocktail was 1.5 ounces of rye, 3/4 of an ounce of pineapple juice, and 3/4 of an ounce of dry vermouth. Fairly similar to the Park Avenue. I haven't tried this one yet. Mixing rye and pineapple juice doesn't sound like it would work to me. But people who have tried this and tested it for me actually say that it is fairly tasty. I'll let you guys make up your own mind. But this was a cabaret venue that I'm throwing in by request of the next musical performer. Our next musical guest is a cabaret singer named Marissa Mulder. Marissa has an album out. I first became aware of her because of an album of a cabaret show she did called Tom in His Own Words. It's an album of Tom Waits covers, absolutely stunning. She also has a newer album out called Two Tickets Left, which includes a bunch of show tunes, standards, and pop songs. Now, when I first started coming to New York regularly a few years ago, I started spending a couple of months out of the year in New York, and one of the first things I did was try to see if she was going to be performing anywhere. She was performing at a place called La Rivista, a little basement Italian place in Hell's Kitchen that happened to be 2 blocks from my hotel. So I went out there. She was performing with Bill Zeffiro, who has an album of his own. And it just blew me away. It was one of the greatest nights. It was the kind of night that I think there's this reason for the phrase only in New York. By the end of the night, everybody in the place knew everybody else. Just about everybody had gotten up to do a song. But one particular song that I asked Marissa for specifically, is I think her version is the best I have ever heard. Here is Marissa Mulder with Paper Moon and Bill.
I never feel a thing is real when I'm away from you, out of your embrace. The world's a temporary parking place. A bubble for a minute. You smile. The bubble has a rainbow in it. Say it's only a paper moon sailing over a cardboard sea. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Yes, it's only a canvas sky hanging over a muslin tree. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me.
Bill Zeffiro and Marissa Mulder, everybody. They are both on Spotify. Bill's got an album of his own compositions out there. And yeah, once things are back to normal, I hope they'll be back at La Revista. We can all be out there. Small little Italian place. And once again, let's give her a great big hand. Thanks, Kelly. Glad everybody's having a good time. I'm going to hip you really briefly. There's a song, I'm not even sure what show it's from. It's it's an obscure show that's on Marissa's most recent album, 2 Tickets Left. There's a song called It's Amazing the Things That Float. The only other version I could see of it is on YouTube. There's a version of Kate Baldwin singing it, who was in Hello Dolly with Bernadette and Bette Midler a couple of years ago, which I saw with the Milford, Michigan high school choir that I was supposed to be in New York with today. But it's amazing the things that float. It's an incredible song that I can't believe isn't better known. But she's got a great ear for finding really good material. Also a version of Chasing the Sun by Sarah Bareilles and Jack Antonoff. But alright, so early on, there was a bit of a request for the stuffed whale at Barnums Museum. We're going to have to zip back in time for that. Back in time. Now, the best picture... Barnum's Museum was down by what is now City Hall Park. The different locations were on either side. Best version of it you can really find a picture of is from when it burned down in 1865. Also, if you're in New York and want to triangulate where you are, that's Trinity Church right down there. St. Paul's Church would be about right across the street from where we are right now. This is the south end of City Hall Park. Eventually, after this fire, they moved to another location across the street. Looked about like this on the inside. But here's the thing. Despite what they say in Hello Dolly, they never had a stuffed whale at Barnum's Museum. They had a real whale. Which, honestly, I think was probably less exciting to watch than a stuffed one. It was just in an aquarium, and about once every 30 minutes or so it would surface. Some people accused Barnum of using a rubber one in some kind of steam mechanism to make it float up now and then. Which is not unlike the kind of thing that Barnum would do. Alright, how am I doing on time? Oh, I'm way ahead on time, I believe, so... All right, there was one of them that it's kind of half done. I would have to do the singing myself, but so we also mentioned early in the song we're going to take a drive to the Beatnik Dives. Maybe we should go driving again. And yes, for those who asked earlier, that is Harold Lloyd driving Babe Ruth around New York. I've been reading a biography of the Babe called The Big Bam. Fascinating book. But we're going to go head to McDougal Street. And Trudy, I don't know what year this map is from. But just below Washington Square Park on McDougal, a street that looks like this right now, stood a place called the Gaslight. Gaslight is sometimes known as a poetry cafe. It was also known for music and comedy, especially folk singing in early comedy. You might have seen it on The Magnificent Mrs. Maisel, or Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, the last couple of years. But the entrance, it was the kind of place that was thought of as a kind of a low-down beatnik dive back in the 1950s. You had to go down into a basement to get in, and then there'd often be the kind of guy who wears sunglasses indoors in a basement at night, hanging around in the place. Another view of the stairs shows guest performer that night, Dave Van Ronk, a folk singer who wrote an autobiography called The Mayor of McDougal Street, and he claimed that the Gaslight was the place where they originated the concept of snapping your fingers after a performance. Because it was something to do with the lease. They couldn't make enough noise to clap, so instead they started snapping after this. Anytime you see beatniks do it, according to Dave Van Ronk, that's where it got started. Hard to know if he was exactly right there. And I actually found out a bit of a research rabbit hole here. A while ago, I was digging through the Village Voice archives on a microfilm reel, and there were some great ads for this, like Hugh Romney, he later became known as Wavy Gravy, Len Chandler, the folk singer, Tom Paxton, very well-known folk singer. All these guys played at the Gaslight in the early 60s. But then somebody put up this thing, thanks to all of these people for making my Twilight Hootenanny at the Gaslight Cafe a success. Among those on the list there is Bob Dylan. Now, Dylan played the Gaslight in 61 and 62, but no, people have cataloged pretty much every breath Bob Dylan ever took, but nobody ever said anything about him playing at the Gaslight in 63. So I managed to contact everybody on this list who is still ambulatory, other than Bill Cosby at the top. Not talking to him, and Bob Dylan himself was not picking up the phone. But several of these people were still alive and answering emails. None of them actually remembered this event, other than like something vague. Somebody vaguely remembered Peter Lafarge putting it together. But I did get a lot of good gossip about the early 60s folk scene. Everybody was sleeping with everybody else. Everybody was loaded up on pills. Everybody was a total narcissist. Lots of really good gossip. So that was fun anyway. But this is the Beatnik Dive. This is about what it looked like on the inside. All right, I'm going to do a folk song for you guys. I've never sung on one of these, but I'll do one now. I wrote this for a movie called At Last Okima a couple years ago. Woody Guthrie was sent to New Jersey when the chorea ate at his brain. And they lay on the back for a decade or more, just dreaming of riding the train. 'Cause he traveled all over the country, spreading the truth and good cheer. And when Woody ascended to heaven, he said, "Man, what am I doing here?" And went doorbell ditching at the pearly gates. He rang the bell and he ran like hell. Heaven would just have to wait. Then St. Peter caught up to Woody as he raced through the circles of hell. He said, "God is well pleased with you, Woody. You've done the Lord's work well." And Woody said, "Heaven, up here in heaven, there's nothing to protest about. But hell is in need of some major reform. So if you try to pull me back out, I'll come doorbell ditching at the pearly gates. I'll ring the bell and I'll run like hell. Heaven will just have to wait." St. Peter said, "Sing for the angels. In heaven the hoots never stop. The boxcars are all filled with pillows. We also abolished the cops." Then Woody said, "I ain't no sellout. I can't knock here on heaven's door until all of the demons join unions and nobody's damned anymore. I'll come doorbell ditching at the pearly gates. I'll ring the bell and run like hell. Heaven will just have to wait." Thanks for indulging me, everybody. I always wanted to play at the Gaslight. Thanks, Ashley. Let me get caught up really briefly on the Time Travel Pub Crawl page comments over here. Tyler says barber shoppers do the snap thing. I'm not surprised about that. So I'm never quite here. The thing about Dave Van Wong's book is a great read, but you never know quite how much to believe of it. Thanks. If you go on YouTube, there's a movie called At Last Okima. It's a short film that I wrote that for. No, Frank, I will definitely not be giving up my day job. Actually, I don't have a day job. I've never had other than taking school groups around a few months out of the year. Nobody would give me a real job. I had to make up my own. But all right, from here we got one more stop on the tour today. We got one more stop. We're down on McDougal Street now. We need to get up to 52nd Street. Best way to do that, of course, is going to be making the jump to Hyperspace. And once we get through Hyperspace, we find ourselves on 52nd Street in the 1940s. This was known as Swing Street at the time due to a high population of swing bars that were up here. One was called the Onyx. You can see Harry the Hipster is performing in here. Harry the Hipster had a song called Who Put the Benzodrine in Mrs. Someone's Ovaltine. I've had a few drinks and I'm kind of spacing on what the Mrs.'s name was. But it's kind of similar to she had to go and lose it at the Astor. Got him in a lot of trouble. Onyx Club looked about like this on the inside. All of the swing guys used to hang out there. They did have a menu with a specific cocktail called the Onyx Special. However, all the research I could do, I could not find what the heck was in the Onyx Special. So people just keep a hold of the drinks you already have. We've been through several already. Just up the road, though, a little ways, was a place called the Hickory House. Now, the Hickory House was not quite as cool looking on the inside to me. It just kind of looks like a family restaurant. It had like horse race and sports scenes around. The oval-shaped bar was considered quite an innovation. But all of the jazz guys used to hang out here. Duke Ellington came in all the time. Thelonious Monk now and then. Hoagie Carmichael. Mostly because their food was really good. They were especially known for their steaks. It's another view of the inside. Also, it was one of the places in New York in the 30s and 40s where you would see both black and white customers, continuing that trend from back on Harry Hills. They had a drink menu. In the 1930s, their drink menu was not cheap. 75 cents at the time would be quite a bit now. A good 15, 20 bucks for a cocktail, which is pretty typical on 52nd Street, I suppose. Quite a number of albums were recorded live in here. Earlier, if you were here in time for the pre-show, the music was Utah Hip live at the Hickory House. Rather enigmatic jazz performer, came over from Germany, recorded 3 or 4 really great albums, one with Zoot Sims, then just left the music scene completely for the next 45 years of her life until her death in, I think, 2003. Also, Marion McPartland Trio was sort of the house band here. They once very reluctantly got Duke Ellington to sit in with them. She told the story for the rest of her life that one time she came up to Thelonious Monk on the street and said, "Mr. Monk, I've been playing some of your stuff at the Hickory House. You got to come hear some of it," which later on struck her as incredibly impertinent. But he did show up, didn't say a word the entire time, and then left her with the bill. But for all of this, Mrs. Murphy's Ovaltine, thanks Nancy. But for all of it being Swing Street, it was generally a place that was a little more laid back. It was known for people to hang out, like Hoagie Carmichael was a known face here. He was the author of the next song. I reached out to a guy named Silas Reed, who I saw playing at a bar here in Chicago. He lives down in Mississippi, but he had a recording of this Hoagie Carmichael song written about either a state or his sister, depending on who you're talking to, or somebody's sister. So here is Silas Reed with a song by Hoagie Carmichael from 1930. Quiet one to play us out for the night.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia, Georgia, I'm singing this song for you. Comes through so sweet and clear, like moonlight through the pine.
reach out to me. Other eyes smile tenderly. In my dreams, still I see that road lead right back to you. Georgia, oh, no peace I find from you. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Reach out for me, yeah. Other eyes smile tenderly. In my dreams, still I see that road lead right back to you. Georgia, Georgia. I find from you, no, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind.
Silas Reed, everybody. Let's give him a great big hand as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it from Silas Reed. Let's hear it from Mayhayley's Grave. Let's hear it from Marissa Mulder. And let's hear it for Eli Seltzer, my brother, our mechanic, our singing mechanic. Also our bartender, pretty much everywhere we go.